looking at the sales team and how we can, use some skills that we've come across along the way. And obviously having Samuel on the call, who is well versed in this area, who's going to take us through the different methodologies that can help the sales team to understand processes, take a little bit more control. And I'll let him do the introduction, but we're very excited to have Sam join us today. I just also wanted to let you know that this is a 2-part course, so you'll join today and also next week. And then following week after that, we have a company coming in called Encino. They were previously called DocFox, and they will specifically be talking about Fika. So I will post those registration links for everybody in the chat. So you are welcome to be a Speedy Gonzalez and to register now, so that it's in your diary. So thanks, Samuel. We're so excited to hear about it. So let's go ahead and give your introduction.
Phenomenal, Amy. Thank you very much. So a very good morning to everyone on the call. It is a privilege to be here. Just so you know, it's always been a dream to be on one of Amy's training sessions for as long as I've known Amy and Martin as well. So it is a great privilege to be here in front of you all today. What we'll be talking about, just to give context to everyone, is that we're actually not going to be talking anything sales. What we are actually going to be focusing on is how do we take control of a situation where we can create value for our number one, prospective clients, but number two, for our existing clients. So actually, not to feel like anyone has been hoodwinked, but ultimately we're going to be talking about the psychology of how sales is done. And this is going to be a little bit different to how everything has been taught to everyone on how to do sales. But what we're trying to do is we're going to be talking about, what is the basic steps that we need to take so that when we get to creating value, we know exactly, number one, what has been done, what works, what doesn't work, and how we can replicate that. So when somebody says to me that, sales is an art, I believe the book by Donald Trump is called The Art of the Deal. I'll challenge that, because it's not really an art. It's actually a science, and it can be repeated, and there is a methodology behind it. I'm sure some of you on this call might have been exposed to different types of methodologies, different types of trainings, and that's absolutely fine. What is probably best when it comes to the environment of learning is that we are exposed to the information, we take what works for us, and we apply it in different situations. And that's ultimately what we'll try to do today. So without further ado, allow me to introduce you to one sales methodology, which is called the Sandler selling methodology. Now, just some context in the story behind what the Sandler selling methodology was created by an engineer, believe it or not, by the name of David Sandler. And David Sandler was actually a submarine engineer in World War II. Obviously, the war ended, thank God. But what he then decided to do, like so many war veterans, is that they needed to find a way to make a living. And of course, being that he only worked in a submarine, he didn't really have any skills that he could that are kind of transferable, should we say, into the corporate world. And so he found himself in a job in a sales role. Now, he explains in his methodology that he tried all these different methods, but nothing seemed to work. And then he kind of took a step back and said, well, let's go and configure a process in order to know where I'm going wrong and where I'm going right. And thus he created the sales submarine. And what the sales submarine is, and I'm going to be sharing a few slides with you in a moment, is before you move on to any stage of anything, might I just add, not just sales, you have to make sure that that process and that stage of the process is completely airtight, exactly like the door of a submarine. And that is the premise of what the Sandler methodology is that before you move on to a stage within the selling submarine, you have to make sure that that previous stage before it was absolutely airtight and completed. So without further ado, I will share my screen and we will go into this accordingly. Just before we begin, is there any questions so far? Is everyone comfortable with where we're at in the journey that we'll be embarking on together? Please note that if there are any questions, don't raise your hand. Just shout out. There's no need to wait on ceremony, and we'll take it from there.
And Martin and I will also track for you in the meeting chat if somebody posts something there. So go right ahead.
Phenomenal. Fantastic. So welcome to the Sandler selling methodology. Now, before we begin, I have to kind of emphasize this, is that for anything to work, we need the success triangle. And what does the success triangle incorporate? It incorporates the behavior, the attitude, and then the technique. If one or two of these, should I say, elements are missing, then unfortunately we're not going to work. And that applies to everything that we encounter in our lives, whether it be in finance, whether it be in credit, whether it be in sales, whether it be in our personal life. Everything rests on the success triangle. So in order to move forward, that is our foundation, is that we've got to have the right behaviors in place. We've got to have the attitude that this is going to work or this isn't going to work, and then change. And then, of course, what will top it off is how we do it, the technique. So just a quick overview of the psychology and the process. So what we're going to be outlining is why even bother? Why even bother having a sales system? I'm sure there's many of you on the call who have been trained, who've been in the corporate world, and have understood that this is the best way to do this sort of thing, and this is how we've been trained, and this is how it's always been done. The only reason why I say that we should probably have a system is that if something should go wrong, and Amy and Martin will probably laugh at me because I am very fixated on the standard operating procedures of certain things, but ultimately it works accordingly to, if something goes wrong, where did it go wrong, so that we can identify how to fix it, right? We will also be going through a typical sales flow and the problems that come thereof, and the psychology of buying. Now, this is going to be quite interesting because each and every one of us on this call is a consumer in one sense or another, and we will ultimately understand and have a little bit of metacognition, which means the thought process of thinking of how we actually purchase things, so that when we are selling to other people, we can understand that better. And then, of course, we'll dive directly into the Sandler solution, which is basically the Sandler submarine. Okay, so ultimately, at the end of the day, when it comes to sales, what is the number one thing that a salesperson or somebody who is in a role of sales? In fact, I'm going to take away the role of sales and just talk about in a process or in a negotiation or in a situation where a person is trying to get something from somebody else. What is the number one thing that they feel that they don't have a sense of? And that is the element of control, right? Sometimes you can start off a process, but eventually it gets to a point where you don't feel like you're in control. And that's what we're trying to address here. We want to make sure that we're in control of the conversation and we understand where this conversation is going. If there is any errors, we're able to analyze and correct them. And again, repeat the positive results and ensure that we cover everything and adopt the best practice going forward, as opposed to trying and trying and trying all over each and every time and expecting different results. I think that's the definition of insanity, where you try the same thing that doesn't work and hoping for different results. So that's ultimately the psychology process. So I think traditionally, and I'm going to say this traditionally, and please, if we can maybe just take a moment to say, maybe we can go back to, I'm going to go to the 1950s. Not that it was a bad time, but ultimately it was a time that everything was mechanical. And I give the example of, a secondhand vacuum cleaner salesperson going ahead and knocking on doors, trying to sell the secondhand vacuum cleaner. And essentially, what was the psychology behind that is that we figured out that sales is a volumes game rather than an actual conversation and actually a transaction. The problem is that in those days, we didn't really take into consideration, well, what is it that people would actually need? And this is what the wrong system ultimately looked like, right? We tried to find someone to generate interest in our product, specifically the secondhand vacuum cleaner salesperson. We try to qualify, right, if there is an actual need for this. The presentation, the way that were interactive and animated of trying to sell this particular product. And of course, we had to kind of like close it or do the objection handling. And the prospect, which would be the consumer, would kind of go, okay, maybe there's a little bit of interest and potentially influence, right? What they'll try and do is try and gather a little bit of knowledge from the interaction, but they didn't commit to anything, in the sense that I'll give you the time of day, and might I just add that as South Africans, we are so good at this, right? Sometimes when you receive that cold call, as consumers even, you'll kind of give that person a little bit of the time. Some of you on the call probably not, and I completely respect you. I fall subject to this kind of tactic. But at the end of the call, it's really not a commit to anything. It's just kind of giving them the time of day. And then, of course, what would happen is that they would disappear. And all of this kind of linked up into what we thought was the right sales methodology and the right sales system. The problem is at the end of all of this, it required so much energy, so much time, so much resources, and at the end, didn't really result in much. Now we walk into Eric Berne. Now, Eric Berne was a humanitarian psychologist, and he said that as opposed to trying to force people to buy something, it would be a case of a transaction, and that everything that we do in our lives, if you really think about it, is a transaction. When you are requesting something from someone, there is a transaction that is taking place, even if monetary terms are not involved. The point is that there is always a psychology process behind the transaction that's taking place. And he stated the following: people buy emotionally as a child, right? They seek permission to do so from their parent, and then they'll justify their decisions intellectually as an adult. So just to unpack that for a moment is, what does that actually mean? So if I give an example of that, it's been the end of financial year end, everyone's got their bonuses, it's phenomenal, we are happy. We get into the state of those dopamine levels that are raised, and ultimately we go on a shopping spree, and we're like, I'm just going to go and buy, I don't know, Amy Martin, what is it that you're going to go buy? Amy's going to go buy a brand new car because she's got that phenomenal that bonus. But afterwards, when she gets to the car dealer, potentially it becomes a case of, is this really a good idea? I really I deserve it, but maybe let me just double check with my husband just to see, is this the right idea? And we'll communicate with our better halves to say, this is what I can do, and this is how we can do it, and we'll try and justify it in our head, trying to seek that permission from the parent, okay? And then we go and we do something and say we purchase that vehicle. And then 3 days later, when we look at our bank balance again, we say, ooh, was that really the best decision to make at this particular point in time? Could I have used it somewhere else? And that's when that buyer's remorse sort of comes into play, in the sense that we start actually thinking about our decision and not being so trigger happy with the purchase. So that's kind of where we're going on why people buy, and that's what Eric Berne came to understand. So again, what does this actually mean for us? So if we understand why people purchase things and why they buy in certain kind of patterns, we can kind of understand, well, if we're trying to create a transaction, who do we need to be speaking to? Do we need to be speaking to our inner child? Obviously, not speaking to the child themselves, but the inner child in each and every one of us. Do we need to be speaking to the parent? And ultimately, how do we create that business case, right, as an adult in that adult state? Now, just to unpack these state of minds a little bit further, it goes kind of like this. And I'm sure many of you are on the call, are parents, or even if yourself has gone through, the parenting process, right? The parent really acts as an advisor. I have two little boys, and I can tell you they're two polar opposites of one another. But the truth is that I have a 5-year-old, and he's kind of at the age where he is going to test the boundaries. And my role as the parent is I can either be judgmental, right? I could be the advisor and say in the sensing of the nurturing side of things, or I can actually revert to my inner child and say, well, we can behave in that way. But ultimately, that's not really what we do as a parent. So the nurturing parent is really the guidance, the consultant, the advisor to say, was that really the best decision that you could make? If we really looked at that again, would you do that? Would you do that again? Would it be the same decision? As opposed to the adult who comes back as the critical thinker. Now, I want you to think as the adult as really, well, is this a return on my investment? Is this going to be, profitable in the future? That real critical thinking, that prefrontal cortex or the front of our brains that actually, is very, very logical in making decisions. And ultimately, that is where one would find themselves when buying. Now, those are two critical areas that we're going to unpack just a little bit further. But the last point is the child. What is the emotional self? Because at the end of the day, human beings do make emotional decisions. Even though we can justify them via logic, we do have an element of that emotional bias to us. Just going to stop there for 2 seconds. Amy, is there any questions?
So far, no questions, unless anybody else wants to ask a question now. I think I have the opposite problem where I'm mostly the inner child and less likely to be the adult.
And that's
think a lot of time that decision is driven by our current state of emotion. Is it something that we need? Then it's a different driver. If it's an emotional purchase, something we would love to have, then it is that that remorse is going to step in some other time because we didn't really need it. That's because we would have loved to have it, and that's instead of buying a little Hyundai, we went and bought a Porsche. The Hyundai would have served us perfectly, but the emotions took over and we bought the Porsche. If we bought the Hyundai, we would have been happy with it because it's going to serve the purse. The Porsche is going to say, "Oi, I didn't know the insurance was going to be so much. I didn't know the tires was going to be so expensive," and all of those kind of things. And I think we've all experienced it, Samuel. I think it's a very emotional driven state of mind thing that you are talking about. Are we in a parent state? Are we in an adult state? Or are we in a child state when we move into that I need to buy or I am going to sell motion?
And I think that also we have to then stop and think, well, where is the person we're trying to sell to as well? So like we might be, in this stage, but what stage are they in and how do we get them? And I'm sure you might cover this. How do we get them into the right state of mind to actually purchase? So, just drawing that card back together to say, it's all good what I am, but what are they? And then need to be on the same line, because if one is here and the other one is here, you're actually going to, you'll have that submarine underneath and the boat on top, and you're going to miss each other.
Absolutely. You guys have hit the nail on the head, and that's exactly where we're going. And that's actually the $1,000,000 question. How do we get someone into the correct state in order to have the correct conversation? Because if you're trying to sell to someone in an adult state, and you're in a state of mind which is kind of like the child state, you're not on equal playing grounds. And ultimately, that is what psychology is making sure that you're on a level playing field. And we're going to go into a lot more detail of this as we go along. But ultimately, this is where we're currently at. And just to cover the emotional self, right? We either have the adaptive child, which is the child that, will get onto the jungle gym, climb onto the trees, jump into the pool, adapt to the environment around them, or the social chameleons that come out from us. You have the rebellious child, which is a case of like, if you help me do this, we can do that. Or it's a case of like, I'm going to do this, even though I was told that I'm not. Or you have, now this is very important in terms of sales, the little professor. The little professor wants to get the attention of whoever it is and let them know that they're actually smarter than they appear to be. So they'll ramble on about a whole bunch of different facts and different informations, whereas it might not be, as relevant to the person as we would think. I go back to the example of the salesperson who's trying to sell second-hand vacuum cleaners. In those days, like I said, they would knock on doors, and whoever opens up the door, hey, if it was the person of the household, they would try and sell them. But they didn't really go into a process, or maybe even understanding, what, hang on a second, you don't actually have carpets, you've got tiles. This product is not relevant to you at all. But because we didn't have a system of thinking, we didn't go into the psychology of it, just wasn't relevant. And that is what the wrong system outcome was. What happens is that we continuously chase buyers, we waste our times, we get defensive over objections. Everyone knows this word objection. And we then go into a state of, okay, well, maybe we need to change the price in order to get this over the line. But what we haven't actually done is that we haven't positioned ourselves in a sense of control, thus meaning that there is no feeling of equalness, right? And that is actually where I'm going to kind of stop on this point, is that everything that we talk about going forward will be a case of, we need to be on the same level, we need to be in the same state of mind, and the real trick is, how do we get the person into the state of mind that we want them to be in? So again, this is what ultimately we are saying when we try to, should we say, when we're going through the wrong sales process, is when we're trying to generate interest, we're actually saying, please talk to me. Like, I just need your time. Can I have 30 seconds of your time just to tell you what I've got? And hopefully we can kind of do a deal thereafter. Qualify, right? Give me the instructions and I'll do anything. Oh yeah, that's fine. Can you call me back in about 10 minutes? If we can talk then. Okay, perfect. No, I'll give you a call back then. No problem. The presentation. Look at me. Look how clever I am. I know all the answers. The close and the objection handling, right? It almost becomes a little bit like begging, like, please buy from me. Like, I really need the sale to go through. And from a prospect's perspective, this is what they're saying. Okay, you can tell me a bit about it. I'm not really interested because I know that I have tiles. They gather information so that they can make comparisons. It's not a very nice way of saying this, but ultimately that is what's happening. You are giving me free information. I'm going to take that information and I'm going to look for something that's probably of the same interest, but not really from you. And there's no real commitment to anything. It's like, I'll give you the time of day, but I'm not really going to be going ahead with whatever it is that you have to offer. And then they disappear because we didn't establish a relationship, and you're not really anyone important in my life. And that's ultimately what we're saying over here. So just to summarize, the wrong system, because it's important to understand what doesn't work and try and figure out what does work. And this is ultimately what the situation looks like. The salesperson goes into their inner child state of mind, and they're begging with no control, right? And there's no challenge. And the prospect is ultimately the parent, and you follow their lead at the end of the day. And that is why I go back to, this is a transaction. Therefore, we need to be on equal playing fields. Just going to stop there for a second. Is everyone with me? I know that this might be a lot just to take in, but ultimately, this is where the power comes in. And this is where we can actually change our way of doing things, from doing things that potentially has always been done, but we just never questioned, to something that we can actually change within ourselves and hopefully advance our sales skills, or should I say transactional skills.
We had lots of thumbs up but no questions yet. So that's good news.
Right. So now we move into the Sandler philosophy, okay? We need to position ourselves in our minds that we are the expert in what we do. So whatever it is, and whichever industry you work in, ultimately you know about your industry better than anyone else. Therefore, if they want information, you are ultimately the one to give it. What we need to then start doing is that we want to position that this person needs your expertise in order to make a decision. And ultimately, the decision needs to be mutually decided, meaning that as the parent, you are the expert, right? The prospect is going to have to be in a child state to seek your expertise. And then the sales decision will be made on an adult to adult conversation or transaction. And every single meeting or every touch point that we have has to end, right, in a firm next steps, right? And that's okay if it's a no as well, because the truth is that, in the sales world, they always say qualify out as quickly as possible. Why do we actually say that? Purely on the basis that if this isn't going to go anywhere, let's not waste any more of our time together, because the truth is that everyone's precious resources these days is actually time. And that's what we're going to go into. So, a big welcome to the Sandler submarine. These are the different stages of Sandler, and these are the different psychology processes at each stage. And we'll go into this in a little bit deeper, but just to give you a highlight.
Sorry, just before you continue, just to explain again, a qualified lead. So when you're saying what you'd like to do, as of your previous slide, what you'd actually like to do is you want to know if there's actually something that's here or not here. So like in layman's terms, does this customer actually want this product, and does this work for them? Yes or no? And rather than know at the beginning, as opposed to like 3 months, 4 months down the line of like consistently trying to get this deal, and eventually, almost like flogging a dead horse, where you could have been focusing on customers that are actually going to buy from you. So that's what we're referring to here. When we're saying like, let's make sure that we know the qualification. Do they qualify as the right kind of customer or not? So just to break it down, and then still disappointed that your submarine is not yellow.
Oh, sorry, everyone. Sorry. David Sandler said.
Continue.
something to do with copyright issues or whatever. But ultimately, yes, that's 100% right. Because even if the answer is a no, at least it's a no. And you've got the answer that you've got, even if it's not the one that you're expecting. And that's very important because, like Amy said, there's no use in flogging a dead horse. So that's ultimately where we lead back to, is that the parent earns trust, the child buys on emotion, and the adult at the end will provide you with the logical justification. And that is ultimately towards the end of the submarine. Okay. So the first thing that we'll go into, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is actually one of my favorite stages of a transactional analysis, is ultimately the bonding and rapport session. Because at the end of the day, nobody buys from anyone who they don't trust. And the bonding and rapport session is not a case of, and please forgive me for saying this, but in a sales environment, the first thing that happens when we get onto a call or a sales anything is the very first question somebody asks, "Hi, how are you?" And as South Africans, we are so polite and we say, "I'm fine, thank you. How are you?" And the answer to that is, "I'm good, thanks." And that to me is just so funny, because the truth is that if I'm meeting someone for the first time, they don't, what am I going to respond? Actually, she's, you know what? Actually, I'm having a really bad day, and my kids didn't wake up on time for school, and I was late, and the traffic was awful, and da 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 da. All these different things are going to be revealed only once I have established a relationship. So it's kind of like a little bit of a redundant question to ask, "Hi, how are you?" But because we don't have anything else to kind of break the ice, that is where we resort to. And not saying that it's wrong, it's just a funny feeling of that this is how we feel that we are bonding and creating a rapport within a business structure. Now, to reverse this, how do we make something a little bit more meaningful? Now, remember, at the end of the day, we want to know, and we're going to just shift our focus a little bit to a corporate or a business environment. We want to know, as much as we can on either the prospect or our existing client, so that we can kind of create an easier pathway to the relationship. And I'm just going to put it out there, everyone, I haven't met a single person who doesn't like talking about themselves. The point being is that how do we get them to that point of allowing us to learn more about them rather than we having to draw out that information? So we can use the following engaging connect questions, on a personal level. And as you can see, we can kind of go down into different layers of the onion. So we use engaging and connecting questions. So we talk about their personal, the past, the present, and future. Martin, I believe you used to work at IDC company XY in the year 2000. That's actually quite an interesting career you got. I understand now that you're working at TradeShield as the credit executive. That's so interesting. But where do you see yourself working in the future? Do you have any retirement plans? As you can see, we start going a little bit down into the future. Now, if I gave Martin the opportunity to answer, I promise you we would get a full-blown answer. Isn't that right, Martin?
I will just shake my head.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So no retirement in the future.
That's a lie.
And then what's more importantly is, let's try and understand the industry. So you can ask the question of, in your industry, what are the trends that you're seeing? Everything that's kind of happening within the South African economy, specifically with regards to this budget discussion, how is this affecting your business? What are you seeing? Again, asking about the different trends. And from a company perspective, what is actually happening within your company? You don't have to ask the in-depth questions, but ultimately you can say, has there been a lot of movement? Have you seen anything different? Where you started? Just getting a little bit more information. And ultimately, talk about what's happening within the market. The most important thing that I have to say before you go into any sort of meeting that you want to create a trust element and an equal business stature with is to research and plan before the meeting, right? So that you've got a little bit of knowledge to what you're actually talking about.
And in saying that, Sam, when you take the time to get to know a person in terms of you've planned, it shows the other person that they're important. Taking an interest in saying, oh, I looked at your LinkedIn profile, not from a stalkery perspective. I may, unless you want to ask me about my retirement, then we can maybe discuss it if you don't want to offend anyone. Martin, unless it's only in that speech that you sent me the other day. But I think that, taking the interest in the person and in the business and in the things that might affect their company also shows that you've it's not just a in and out, sign the deal, and off you go. It's I actually care about this business and I want to create that partnership with you. And by doing so, I've taken an interest in who you are and what things would affect you.
100%, Amy. And that boils down to the real bottom line is that if we want to do business together, we can only do this based on trust. And building a relationship is fundamental to that. And this is actually important because remember, we can't move to the next stage unless we've done this correctly. Because you'll see further down the line on the submarine, we'll get to a point of decision making, and we want to know that we're making a decision with somebody that we actually want to work with, and not somebody who we actually don't know anything about and have a gut feeling about, is this going to work or not? Because at the end of the day, everyone's accountable to someone, and that we want to be sure. We want to be 100% sure that we're making the right decision. So I'm going to introduce, I'm not sure if anyone on this call has heard of it, but there are obviously different types of personalities that goes along a spectrum. And if we understand who we're talking to at a particular point in time, we can then adjust our way of talking as well as our way of behaving so that we can create the biggest rapport possible. Now, I'll introduce the quadrants. We have a dominant personality, we have an influencing personality, we have a steady relator personality, which basically means more social, realistic, and a little bit, wants to be sure of certain things before moving ahead. And then you have the compliant personality. Now, a lot of us on the call will not necessarily have only one type of, should I say, disc profile, but we can have like I say, it is a spectrum, meaning that we can have combinations, but there usually is one or two types of our personality, depending on the context as well, of where we actually fit on the spectrum. So just to go into a little bit more detail about what everyone else is, I've kind of used the example of the birds, as they would call it. Now, the dominant personality is translated as this: they are decisive, they are tough, strong-willed, competitive, demanding, independent, self-centered, right? But under pressure, they lack empathy, they lack any concern for who they speak to, how they speak to anyone, right? And what is their greatest fear? The loss of control. Everything needs to be within our control. So if we think of a CEO of a global company, that is probably the personality that we would think about, is a dominating personality. Now, each and every one of us, just by the way, depending on our different context, might have the same or a polar opposite personality to who we potentially may be speaking to from a perspective basis. So I just want to put that out there before we continue, is that it's all about being able to identify what the personality type is, right? And how do we match it? The second one, as you can see, is the parrot, which is sociable, talkative, open, enthusiastic, persuasive, but under pressure becomes very disorganized, and their fear is social rejection. And we can do a quick exercise just to kind of give different people the different personalities within the world. The steady relator is somebody who is calm, steady, careful, patient, a very good listener, and very modest, right? But under pressure, they might be too willing to just, do what needs to be done without actually questioning because they don't want to rock the boat. And their fear is loss of stability. And the last personality is obviously the owl, which is the compliant personality. These are individuals who are precise. They follow the rules. They are logical. They are careful. They are formal and disciplined. And under pressure, overly critical. And what they fear out the most is the criticism of their work. Now, a quick fun exercise is that, if we had to take a variety of different people within the world, where would we put them? And please, participation from the audience would certainly be appreciated. But I'll give you an example. On this spectrum, from what we've just learned, where do we think that Donald Trump fits on this spectrum. And remember, it could be more than one.
He's definitely not the parrot.
He's
I would
definitely.
say he's very, very, very decisive. Why? Because he comes out of the corporate world where he's been fighting all his life to make something not just of himself, but of the businesses that he's attempted. And he's failed quite a few times. And if you say he's failed, lost control. But what did he do? He takes control back again. And then he continues with that very decisive behavior style of his. I wouldn't put him in the calm category either. So Al decisive would be what I think.
So would you say that he is definitely a dominant personality, and maybe a little bit of the compliant personality, precise, follows rules, logical, careful?
Yes, yes. And why do I say that? Have you watched him when he talks to a child or a person that is of um, a disadvantage to him, like a person in a wheelchair or something? Then you see Donald Trump switch like this. Then he goes down. Whereas normal he is the upright and he talks to you in a different tone of voice. But when it comes to that vulnerable person or the vulnerability of people, then he becomes the down person. He comes to your level, and that I think is one of his greatest traits. Although he's a rude and a very hard businessman, I think he's still got very, very good traits that we can learn from.
Of course. So can I tell you a secret, Martin? His actual profile is an I, which is the parrot, right? And he is an S, purely on the basis that when he's under pressure, things get disorganized. And his fear of social rejection is actually what drives him. Not necessarily, and he comes across very much as a dominant personality. You are 100% right on that. He's very good at masking it. But ultimately, what is he really afraid of? His fear is really of the social rejection. And ultimately, he comes across as very calm, very stable, very, whatever. But when put under pressure, things happen a little bit too quickly, and he doesn't like the loss of stability. That element of stability is very important. So just a very interesting contrast to how people present themselves. But when we look a little bit deeper under the surface, what actually happens? A separate example to this is our president, President Cyril Ramaphosa. What is his personality? He comes across as very calm, steady, careful, patient, but on a different side, maybe behind the scenes. And I'm not sure if anyone's read the news articles lately, but apparently he is a very, very dominant personality, right? His negotiation skills are quite something to be trifled with, and actually that is where his strength actually lies. So his dominant personality, right, is with regards to S, but then is also a D, which is the dominant side of things. So the point of the exercise really is to show you, and you can kind of think about this on yourself, is that where are your dominant personalities? Now, when I say, sorry, not dominant, your most prominent personalities, what is your natural way of falling into this? I can tell you right now, my personal should I say preference for personality over here is that I'm definitely an I, and I'm a C, and that is just me from that. But everyone in each different situation, their more prominent personality would come out. Now, why is this important? We need to understand what our personal personality is, so that when we are talking to somebody else, we don't want to be on the back foot. Now, can you imagine if you had a dominant personality talking to a steady relator, right? the one, sorry, should I say, the steady relative will crumble under the dominance. Or could you imagine a sociable person, so the parrot talking to the owl, which is the compliant? They're just not going to see eye to eye. So again, to reiterate, this is to bring out the fact that when we are talking to people, let's try and understand where their personality is, even though it may be for the very first time, but just be cognizant of the fact that these are the different personalities that we can understand and try and adapt to. So again, just
I once watched a test having a meeting, a conversation, a demonstration, and he was talking, he was the speaker. But in the audience, there was this D who constantly wanted to take control. And he controlled this guy so brilliantly. He said to this guy, Samuel, I understand exactly where you come from. However, just now, we're going to have an opportunity for questions and answers. Then we'll give you an opportunity to speak. So what he just told him, he said, shut up and sit still until I tell you can talk. It was done so brilliantly that this dominator had to sit back and keep quiet because this calm, collected guy just went through the motions, doing the presentation, and knew exactly who he was talking to and how to keep control over that personality.
That's so important, Martin, because that's not really a skill that one gets taught. Unfortunately, that goes through that is developed through the school of hard knocks, right? But the point being is that he had that intelligence and he had the insight to know how to deal with a different personality. And the truth is that we're all going to deal with a kind of personality that is completely opposite to us at some stage or another. How we treat that, and again, if you have a certain personality, how do you talk to other people and how do you interact with them? Again, making sure that you maintain that level of equal so that it doesn't become a power struggle. And that's I think what we're trying to reiterate here. The next part is a concept called neurolinguistic programming. Now, I just want to let everyone know that majority of language, right, is done through body language. Your body language speaks more than your actual spoken words and the tonality of how you say something. Now, let's just think about that for a second. The way that you position yourself and the way that your body is interacting with space and time at a particular moment speaks more, gives more direction of what you're thinking and where your mindset is than your actual spoken words. When I learned about this, I thought this was phenomenal, because the truth is that because one doesn't really interpret body language, or one doesn't know how to interpret body language, it's kind of ignored. But if we're able to kind of tap into how that body language is being presented, well, then we've got a little bit more insight into what we're saying and who we're saying it to and how they are actually reacting to us. Now, to give you an example about the tonality, because the way that something is said gives you the indication of whether something is going in the right direction or potentially going in the wrong direction. I give you a simple example. Now, listen to the way that I'm going to say it. I did not say she stole the money. I did not say she stole the money. I did not say she stole the money. And I did not say she stole the money. Now, each and every one of those tonalities that I've just given to you could imply something completely different. The first one is, I did not say she stole the money, all right, which would mean that it was not really it's not an accusation over there. The second one is, I did not say she stole the money, so implying that a different action was done. The third one saying, I did not say she stole the money, meaning that the way that one is saying it is not the correct, should I say, implication. And the last one is, I did not say she stole the money, meaning that it may not have been the money that she had stolen, it could have been something else. So again, tonality and the way that things are being said will help us interpret where we are within the process. Amy, I'm just going to do a quick time check here. How are we doing for time?
You have 4 minutes left, so I think we should pause there for questions and then continue onto the next portion next week. So I do see that there are some things in the comment section, so let me just go through it. Some people did post what they feel they are in terms of an I or a D or a C, so that is quite fun. I'm still not sure where I fit, but we can talk about that later. And then Sharif said that he does believe that if you walk into a room, you must always do a quick analysis, enough to categorize the individuals that you're going to see. And Fatima said, thank you for the amazing session. Great insights from different perspectives. Please share your presentation, which we will do shortly after the session. We will post it in the Knowledge Center as part 1. So we can pop that to you in a link if you'd like, Fatima. But are there any other questions from anyone else on the floor?
While we're waiting, what Sharif said is so true. Usually we're looking for little leads to tell us who we're going to talk to. And some people look for it in the room, and that's usually a big mistake. I made that mistake. I walked into the room and I saw things on the wall about golf and golf pictures and a hole in one. And I went talking to this like about golf, and he had this blank stare at me. He said, "This is not my office." Can you imagine my bubble being burst as a golfer? I thought, I've got this like in the bag. I can talk his language. In the meanwhile, we're not in his office. We're in someone else's office. So be very careful what you use as indicators to tell you whom you're talking with, because that could be very detrimental to the conversation that you're going to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I got a question for you, Samuel. Is that especially now when you're talking about body languages, and I believe that it is extremely difficult at this point in time where our country is as a whole, because what you see as closure with your arms crossed, it could be just natural because of the different culture.
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
not that that person is cutting you off from the conversation or don't want to talk, but that's very interesting to see what you've got to say about that.
Absolutely, Sharif. What I was going to say actually about that is that actually falls into the cultural insights, which is essential. Even though one may come from, when we come from a very rich diversity of people, when it comes to the cultural, it's very important that we understand what cultural insights offer to us. So if we know, and again, this is all about our research and the planning beforehand. Who are we going to be meeting? What could be the potential of the cultural insights that could be introduced to that conversation? And let me add, there are different ways of doing business in different cultures. We'll get into that in the upcoming few sessions, because there's a way of figuring out. Yes, the culture is the top layer, should I say? It's the outer layer of the onion. But as we dig a little bit deeper and we start getting on the same playing field or the level of transaction, then you start having a conversation. And that's ultimately what it is that even though we come from different backgrounds, we've got different cultural beliefs, the point being is that we can all have we can always find common ground. And that's a definite.
I think it's okay to find the common ground, but it's also nice to see that you're watching Shrek.
It's all about the onion. It's all about the onion. Let's just hope none of us are ogres here. Very good.
Samuel,
I
it's
love
very
that.
interesting. I think we've run out of time here.
Yes,
And not
we
to keep
have.
but it was brilliant. It's very interesting. And I think that we must always keep the option open to have a third session, because I think we're steering towards that, where a lot of people have got questions as to how can I actually identify where I am. Because if you don't know where you are, you won't know how to look for that traits in the other person that you're going to talk with. And then you might have a completely misconception of who you're talking to and talk on the wrong level. But
And or we can also provide ways that we go and find out how, who these people are, what methods do we use to investigate. But we
yeah,
can cover that in the next session. But thank you to everybody who did join us, and we're excited to see you next week. Thank you, Samuel, for joining us. It was actually a pleasure to have you. And we will definitely be doing this again. Not just because of next week, but I mean after that too.
Absolutely. So for everyone who's still on the call, thank you very much for having me. Just as a quick teaser for next week, what we will be uncovering is the pain funnel. How do we actually get to the bottom line of what a client is looking for and what their actual pain points are?
finding out if they've got carpets.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Bye,
everybody, for
everyone.
joining. Have a super day.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Shady.
Bye.
JC,
Any
were you
thanks,
able
Martin?
to
Yes,
hear
sorry,
us?
I didn't want to interrupt your session over there. You guys were on a roll, and I know time-wise it's a factor. We were talking about emotional buying. Each person is an emotional buyer as a consumer.